I see Craig's on, so let's just give it another minute anyway for anyone else who's joining. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to CB8's Congestion Pricing January 2025 meeting, but we'll still wait another minute. Going to get started, Craig. Turn it over to Kevin for a minute.
Sure, let's do it.
Okay.
Welcome, everyone. If this is your first time joining us virtually, you will notice that you are currently muted, and everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting, except for the committee co-chairs, Craig and Alita. As we move through the agenda, the co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to React icon on your device and pressing the raise hand button, not the wave or thumbs up, as those will disappear. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling in on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is available for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you need to go to participants section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me, I'm here for support. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kevin. So I'm Alita Camp. I'm co-chair of the Congestion Pricing Task Force, along with Craig Later. Craig does a very effective job at giving us the status report on what the MTA has been up to and all the rules and implementation of those rules. So Craig, take it away.
All right, thank you, Alita. Let me just share my screen as we get started. Actually, I just sent a request to share my screen. Kevin, if you hear this, if you're able to allow me to share, that would be great. Looks like I can. Just let me make sure I'm going to the um, right screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I
All
can.
right, great. And again, good evening, everyone. It has been a while. So I think we are going to take this first portion, since the first agenda item is a little lengthy. It's congestion pricing status update, review of recent developments regarding implementation, overview of congestion pricing policies, and focus on travel to and from Community District 8. So I have put together this PowerPoint to help guide us through each of those topics. And when I am done, we will open the floor to questions. And I will just ask if we could, and we'll remind everyone of this again when we open the floor, that we're really trying to concentrate on the information presented and questions. I know that there may be people who are anxious to share their opinions about congestion pricing, but we are really focused on just trying to communicate information at this time, as it is just too early to be able to present any information. Anything would be anecdotal in terms of the program itself, because things are prone to change after 2 weeks. So this is really all going to just be fact-based. And then we will get into our second item, which is a little more specific. So, status updates. So since it has been basically a year since we have met, I'm just going to take everyone through a 1 minute tour of the last year. So as everyone probably knows, the congestion pricing um, project was supposed to go into effect sometime in June or July. I thought it was around July 1st. I'm blanking, but the governor put a pause on it on June 5th, and the MTA board subsequently approved that pause at their board meeting later that month. And that pause was then lifted by Governor Hochul on November 14th. And she had announced as part of that lifting that she was proposing that the toll rates would be 40% lower than they had originally been proposed. And this fell within the context of what was studied in the environmental assessment, which, if anyone recalls, studied pricing in which the base passenger vehicle rate was anywhere between $9 and $23. So in order to not trigger a new environmental review, $9 was the lowest amount that they were that the EA would still be effective, if you will. So that was approved by the MTA board on November 18th. As everyone probably is aware, there was some drama as to whether this would actually get started. There were various lawsuits that were seeking to prevent the start of operations. I'm not going to go into any detail about those, but ultimately they didn't result in any injunctions to halt the program, resulting in tolling beginning on January 5th of this year, just 2.5 weeks ago. So far, from the standpoint of how it is operating, from a technical standpoint, there haven't been any operational issues that have been reported, and that isn't to say that that people may have encountered some sort of issue. And again, it's early, and there's been a lot of focus in the media about the program itself. But there haven't been any real glaring issues in terms of people that are getting told or not told inappropriately against the policies. And I'll explain that in a minute, because there is some confusion, I think, in terms of what roadways are being told. And we'll get into that as we focus on our district itself. And I think going forward, there's still some uncertainty, if you will, because there are ongoing legal and political efforts, both at the local and national level, to halt congestion pricing. So we will have to see how that plays out. The new administration has, or the president has made statements saying that he's looking to stop it. It's been reported that it will be hard to stop because of the manner in which this program has basically been permissible through the federal level, through what's called a VPPP. That's a value pricing pilot program, which allows for variable toll rates on various roadways. And once this program was in effect, it's hard to really stop that without possibly threatening other tolling infrastructure elsewhere in the country that is not as controversial, if you will. So that's really how we got to where we are today. So let me just go through quickly some of the key policies as it relates to congestion pricing. So the way in which the toll boundary was determined is based off of the law, which was signed in 2019. It was the adopted New York State budget for 2020. I believe it was approved in April of 2019, and that included all the language that is really directing how the program was implemented. So the law itself speaks about the congestion zone, which the congestion relief zone, as it is called in MTA vernacular, and I believe in the law itself, I'll just refer to it for ease as the toll zone of inclusive of 60th Street and South. So any questions and any points I make later on in regards to the Queensboro Bridge and how that is being tolled, it is because inclusive of 60th Street would include the Queensboro Bridge entry points. And that is something that we have been mentioning on this task force for a long period of time. It was something that was only picked up recently by the media, but we have talked about it ever since the environmental assessment was issued back in, I believe, August of 2023. So you heard it here first. So tolling is now, and there have been some changes from when it was originally proposed, but tolling is only assessed for vehicles when they enter the toll zone, not when exiting. Originally, it was supposed to be either entering or exiting. It is now only when you enter the zone. Passenger vehicles and what are classified as other small vehicles and motorcycles are only tolled a maximum of once per day, and that is based off of calendar day, while small trucks, large trucks, and buses are charged each time that they enter the toll zone. And buses, I just want to separate out the exempt buses, which include the buses that are operated by commuter provider. So actual commuter service as opposed to tourist buses or other recreational buses, those are exempt. And we'll get to the exemptions in a moment. Trips that operate entirely within the toll zone are not tolled. People who live at 60th Street and below are only tolled um, upon re-entering their area south of 60th Street. The FDR Drive and West Street are not part of the tolling program, but tolls are assessed as soon as vehicles enter or exit the Manhattan street grid south of 60th Street or south of 61st Street, it should say technically. So I'll get into that a little more in a moment. And then crossing credits. So crossing credits are awarded when when vehicles cross at either the MTA or Port Authority facilities that flow right into the toll zone. So that's the Queens Midtown Tunnel and the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, which are the MTA toll entities, and then the Holland and Lincoln tunnels that are Port Authority facilities. So in regards to the toll rates and how it works, so peak hours are considered weekdays from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. and weekends, toll peak hours are 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And overnight hours, the non-peak hours are when you have the discounted rates that are 75% lower than the base rates. It is important to note, because this is something that wasn't clear until last month, that toll by mail is generally a 50% higher fee than if you use Easy Pass. And the distinction about Easy Pass is that you need to make sure that you have your Easy Pass account linked to the specific vehicle and license plate tag in order to be charged the discounted Easy Pass rate. And that is because they are verifying that the account and license plate match. And if they find that they don't, then the toll by mail rates take effect. And I've
Greg, just on this point, it is an issue for rental cars. It's an issue for borrowed cars because then it doesn't match. There's some misinformation from rental car companies. But I have a question. If you come in from Pennsylvania with an Easy Pass issued by Pennsylvania, most states don't give the same credit to out-of-state Easy Passes as they do to in-state. What happens and how are they charged?
I believe that is probably correct. And I believe that this program may only be providing those Easy Pass discounts if you have an account that is New York or New Jersey or MTA based. I need to double check that, so don't hold me to that, but that I think is how it works, but I'll need to try to confirm that.
And I know when the MTA was presenting, sorry for the background siren, when the MTA was presenting to community board members about this, you had asked about holidays and whether a Monday holiday is counted as a weekend or a weekday, and they did not have an answer at that time. Have they created an answer since then?
It's funny you asked that. I was going to mention that because this morning decided I was going to call the Easy Pass hotline to see if there was an answer because I found nothing issued in terms of official announcements. And the customer service representative was very helpful and explained that as of now, there have been no directives to discount holidays. It's basically based on the day of the week that the holiday falls on. So Martin Luther King Day 2 days ago on a Monday counted as a typical Monday. That is something that the customer service rep said could change. I don't know that she was knowledgeable in terms of how the policy is being rolled out, but it is something that we may want to be cognizant of. I mean, in my personal opinion, I think it doesn't make any sense that holidays would be treated as weekdays when clearly congestion is or traffic levels are at a very different scale between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. On holidays when those higher fees would be in effect if the holidays fell on a weekday. So that's my understanding of it.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So as I was saying, there are higher fees if you are told by mail as a result of it reading your license plate. And then I've provided here the tolls that are currently in effect, separated out between easy pass rates and tolls by mail rates for peak and off-peak periods for each vehicle type. And as part of the rollout of the program when it was unpaused, it was announced that these current rates would be in effect through 2027, and then they would increase by about 33% in 2012 and then 25% in 2015, meaning it would be for passenger vehicles $12 starting in 2028 and then $15 starting in 2031. All right. Next slide. Continuing with the key policies, just talking a little more about crossing credits. So as I mentioned, there are crossing credits that are provided to vehicles that are crossing at the tolled facilities that enter into the congestion zone. It is important to note that there are separate or different credits provided to Port Authority crossings and MTA crossings. They are higher at the Port Authority crossings. And I would imagine that's in part because of the uproar on the New Jersey side about the tolls, but and the fact that they aren't really getting any of the financial benefits as opposed to on the New York side with the MTA. That's speculation, so I probably shouldn't have even said that. But it is right now a $3 credit if you use the Lincoln Holland tunnels. It is $1.50 for crossing at the Midtown Tunnel or Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. And again, the vehicle's license plate must match the Easy Pass account in order to receive that credit. And the rates differ for each vehicle type. And it is important to note that this is only in effect during peak periods. When the off-peak fees are in place, when it's $2.25 for a standard passenger vehicle to cross, it was determined that the crossing credits wouldn't be necessary at such a low rate in those off-peak hours. All right, now some specific items that pertain to Community District 8. And a lot of them relate to the Queensboro Bridge. So the confusion, as I alluded to, regarding the Queensboro Bridge has to do with its location, and it all aligns with the law, whether you agree with what the intent likely was, which was to basically toll the bridge, or whether you don't. It's a matter of the fact that if you are coming inbound, if you use the lower level, you are either exiting onto 60th Street or you are exiting onto 2nd Avenue going south, and you are technically in the congestion zone. If you are using the inbound upper level, you filter out onto either 62nd or 63rd Street, and thus you are not charged upon exiting the bridge. If you are coming inbound at on the upper level and you then choose to head south, you will be told as soon as you cross those, meet those stanchions between 60th and 61st Street, unless you are heading on the FDR Drive and going to either the Brooklyn Bridge or the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, and the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel has its own separate toll. The Brooklyn Bridge remains free, so you could still get to and from Community District 8 to Brooklyn via the Brooklyn Bridge without being tolled. Or you can stay on West Street on the other side and continue north up to 60th Street. So if you, I don't know why anyone would do that, but theoretically, you are not charged until you then enter the actual street grid south of 61st Street. So that is how it works for inbound traffic. If you're talking about outbound traffic, if you are coming from the north, because technically the bridge is located at 60th Street, between 59th and 60th Streets, you are crossing into the congestion zone to enter it, and thus the policy was established that you are being assessed the congestion fee as you are exiting as you are exiting Manhattan and going onto the bridge. So there is thus no free manner of exiting Manhattan via the Queensboro Bridge from most of Community District 8. If you are already in the congestion zone, and if you are one of our residents that live on 59th Street or 60th Street and you were to go onto the bridge directly, you would not be charged outbound, but you would be charged coming back in if you were to cross over back into the congestion zone. I'll open the floor to questions in a second. Let me just finish going through these. I mentioned FDR Drive and West Streets and the Brooklyn Bridge. Yeah, I think I mentioned everything here. And just to be clear, any vehicle traveling to the three tunnels from our district will be assessed the congestion fee and will be provided the crossing credit. Let's just say crossing credit. If they are if their easy passes are aligned, but they will be charged the congestion fee and they will be charged the toll that they would typically be charged on those facilities. So I know that was a lot. Does anyone have any questions?
I do. I have one more question. So if you're leaving New York City in the daytime, there's no charge going over the George Washington, which is irrelevant for this, I guess, or the tunnels to New Jersey in outbound, but there is a charge coming back in. So if you go out for the day, you get charged the $9 fee, but if you come in at night, there's no credit because it's nighttime, it's after 9 o'clock. So even though you're coming back, you're still being assessed the full $9, correct? Is that clear? That because you
based on the time that you enter
credit because you've spent your day outside of New York. So coming back at night, you wouldn't be charged the fee, but you get sucked out of the fee because you don't get the credit for crossing because it's nighttime, even though you went there in the daytime.
Yes, I guess that is correct because it is based on the time that you enter and exit the zone. So if you entered, if you pay the fee because you entered the zone to access the Lincoln and Holland Tunnel at 11 a.m., you're paying the full congestion the congestion fee. And if you came back after 9 p.m., you would be only paying 220. You wouldn't be paying because you've already paid, and I don't believe you would receive the credits.
Right. So maybe that's an issue for some people, just raising it, but
no, that and that's something I hadn't even thought about. So thank you for that. All right. Let me just make sure let me see where we are in here. Oh, so let me actually just continue. So I don't have a lot left of this portion. So I just want to highlight the discounts and exemptions and the different plans that are in place. So there are 5 types of exemptions, or 6 technically, but one is not really applicable to the general a few of them aren't applicable to the general population. The 2 that I will just highlight a little further, and we'll make sure we post this so everyone has direct links, but there is a low income discount plan, which is in effect for households with adjusted gross incomes of under 50,000, in which for the first 10 fees you are assessed in a calendar month, you pay the full amount, and then you receive 50% discounts on any days in which you're assessed a fee beyond those first 10. There's the individual disability exemption plan, which is mandated by the law, and there's an entire application process. And I'll provide a little more information about that in a minute. There's an organizational disability exemption plan with a separate exemption application process. There's an emergency vehicle exemption plan. There's a commuter bus exemption plan, and then there is a specialized government-owned vehicle exemption plan. So for anyone who is interested in learning more, I've provided links on here, and I have a little more information just to cut through all the information that's out there, just highlighting both the individual disability exemption plan, how you apply for it, and the same thing for the lower income discount plan.
So
Um,
why don't we just have this information available and kind of move past it, since as lawyers say these documents speak for themselves. It's all pretty self-explanatory. It's all pretty explanatory on this.
so
It's fairly clear. So just because it's been a while and there's still a lot to go. That's all.
So
Thank you.
that was exactly my hope. I again just want to provide it for informational purposes only. And then last but not least, and we'll come back to this because this may impact the next agenda item, is taxis and for-hire vehicles. So they are, as part of this congestion pricing program, charged what are called entry charges. So for taxis, upon entering the zone, passengers, and it's not on a per passenger basis, it's on a per trip basis, just to be clear, are assessed a 75-cent entry charge. If you are in a for-hire vehicle, meaning an Uber or a Lyft or a livery vehicle, it is $1.50 per trip as an entry charge for going into the congestion zone. Those fees are also going to increase gradually in 2028 and 2031, settling eventually at $1.25 for taxi passengers and $2.50 for for-hire vehicle passengers. And this is separate and entirely from the congestion surcharge that we're going to be talking about in the next agenda item. But I know there's obviously a relationship between the two, especially for anyone who's assessed both fees. So we will get to that. But that, I think, summarizes all the key information regarding congestion pricing and where we are today and the policies that have been laid out. So happy to take questions and
I
try
just
to.
have one more question. Craig, why is everything going up 33% in 3 years when that is clearly, unless something goes terribly wrong, way above the inflation rate? Do you know what justifies that? And then another 25% 3 years after that. That's a huge increase. It's almost 100%. Or maybe 75% or something. Do you know why they came up with those numbers? Is that because Hochul reduced the fee so much?
Yeah, that's my understanding is that it was always intended to be $15 for passenger vehicles. And at least from a political standpoint, she was trying to make the case that she was saving New Yorkers money. And as I said, the 40% discount that brought it down to $9 was a result of the limitations of what was studied in the environmental assessment. And in order to meet revenue goals, the idea was to eventually get to $15. And it was, I believe, done to be incremental in order to try to create, from an economic standpoint, an equilibrium to hopefully um, because you always see a rebound effect, if you will, take place, but to hopefully keep the pricing at a level to achieve the congestion reduction goals while not missing out on the revenue targets. So while I said it was a 33 and 25% increase, that's just math. So that if 40% of 15 is 9, but if you take 9 and a 33% increase is only 12, it would be a 60% increase to go from 9 to 15, I believe. No, 66% to go from 9 to 15. Yeah,
That,
6
that,
over 9 is 66. So it sounds more dire when I put it that way. But that's really, I think, the explanation as to how it was arrived at those figures.
It sounds fairly dire for those whose incomes won't match the increase in these fares. And if it does succeed in reducing congestion to the amount that they would like, then how are they making up all the revenue that's not going to fund the MTA from congestion pricing? But that's another conversation. If we're turning to questions, let's go to people who are not on the board right now. We're ready for that. I know that I was emailed about the taxi thing, but I think that you were pretty clear about that. So are we going to the public, Craig?
Yeah, let's go to the public.
Okay, so let's start with Heidi Steinberg.
And again, just a reminder to everyone to please keep this to questions, and to, again, as a broad reminder that we want to just make sure that we are respectful to everyone, that we don't ever pull anyone out by name or make disparaging comments, and just practice good decorum as we are, as members, expected to do.
Thank you.
So much for having me. And I'm new to this discussion, so I appreciate in advance your patience. I do have a number of questions. I guess the most important question is perhaps either in the chat or after my questions, you can suggest how I can best educate myself on this whole congestion pricing process from the beginning, because I'm confused as to why the MTA is deciding for New York City residents their choices about how to get around the city. And I speak about this, I've been disabled. Luckily I'm on recovery, but I have been disabled, and it's feels to me, and I'd be curious to know what you all think, discriminatory not only to disabled seniors and those with children, but to those of us. I live on 85th Street, and I've had to be in a private vehicle. I cannot ride the train because the elevators are too unreliable. And I'm confused as to why, if I go to a doctor's appointment below 61st Street, I'm charged extra for that. So I just want to be educated, and I'm interested in information as to all this. Also, how do they know if you've gone through the toll only once? Like, for instance, I was making a donation to the Materials for the Arts in Long Island City, and it was one of the first days after the congestion pricing, and it hit me, oh my gosh, I'm going to be told when I go on the 59th Street Bridge, and I'm going to be told when I get back from the 59th Street Bridge. So how did they know it's only one time a day? And then the other thing I'm confused about is there have been a lot of congestion fees. There's a multitude of congestion fees on the taxi cabs, and I'm confused as to how those and those have been on for what, a couple years now. I'm confused how to those relate to this new congestion fee.
So last question first, that's the second item on the agenda. So we will get to that because the board passed a resolution back in 2019 asking that that fee be eliminated when they start with these fees. Second question, they're paying an awful lot of money to a company in Tennessee to administer this program. Presumably there are computers that will be able to know if you've gone in once, the same way when you leave the New Jersey Thruway, whatever they call it, the turnpike, they know how long you've been on it and charge the Easy Pass accordingly. But you will only be charged once when you come back into this, when you are coming back into, when you're going into the zone, when you're leaving Manhattan, I'm sorry, to go over the Queensboro Bridge, not when you come back. Even if you choose not to go on the FDR Drive and you choose to meander through the southern part of Manhattan, you will only be charged the one time that you I guess commence the fee structure on those gantries that you'll pass going onto the bridge. And then the first question, there's a lot of information on our website. Craig, maybe we could post a link to the MTA information about the congestion pricing that you've always summarized. I would suggest, Heidi, that you go back and look at our previous resolutions, because Craig has always done a very detailed job of summarizing whatever information the MTA has provided. So there's a lot there. And then the MTA has a link, and they also have a phone number, which, as Craig mentioned, he had used earlier to be able to get some information, we hope, from the people answering the customer service at the Easy Pass or congestion pricing. So if we could just put that on the chat, and then I don't know, Craig, if you want to add to that.
No, I think you largely answered it. And just to take us fully back, the law for congestion pricing was passed as part of the 2019 adopted New York or 2020 adopted New York State budget. So those decisions were made on a state level. So essentially, this is a state issue. The city really has very um, little. No, I don't. They obviously have a stake in it, but they don't have much involvement in terms of how the program has been rolled out or how the policies have been determined. Those are really being dictated by the MTA itself, which is a state entity.
So if we want to have an impact on those decisions, it sounds like, and please tell me if I'm correct, it would be best to take it up with my state representatives.
Yes. I
Okay,
mean, we are obviously a conduit to that, and we have close relationships with all of our elected officials at the city and state level. Um, but yes, any actions that would affect policies are done at the state level.
okay. Because,
I-
yeah, I'm sure you're well aware of the discrimination that's happening for those of us in the city paying the city taxes. And I've been riding the bus in the disabled section, which I had blissfully never done before. And, it's very crowded there with people with small children and seniors, and everyone starts talking and everyone is concerned and complaining. So,
And yeah, and again, I highly encourage you, if you are eligible, meet the requirements, to make sure you apply for the individual disability exemption. In
thank
which
you.
case you would not get charged at all for it.
Thank you. Thank you for.
And those issues have come up in our prior meetings, so you could go back and skim through if you don't have a lot of time. The minutes from the meetings, which are all posted on the CB8 website. But certainly we understand that there's a lot of frustration with this. Thank you very much for coming to the meeting and for asking your questions.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I see Kaz and then Leah. Kaz, is that you, Kaz?
Is there another cause?
Mentally or physically? I'm here. I'm here both.
Hi, Kaz.
Hi, Craig.
You change your icon.
Well, everybody knows me by that.
Yes.
The NTA was guaranteed $1 billion from the congestion pricing.
Yes, a year to pay the interest on the $15 billion bond.
What happens to the money that's collected over $1 billion?
Craig, maybe you know, I don't.
Yeah, I honestly do not know the answer to that. I know that it's probably not an issue yet because when they unpaused it and came up with and put forward the lower prices, they basically had to rework the financial equation and essentially, if I'm not mistaken, slow down some of the contracting that they were going to do in order to um, support the capital plan projects that were supposed to be paid for as part of this. So they still stated that they were going to meet their revenue goals, but it was not necessarily going to be as quick as it otherwise would. So they were going to be accommodating the various schedules as part of this for the individual projects in order to keep the momentum forward, if you will. But I forgot to remind myself of the details of that, but I know that they provide an explanation and it's out there in the public. And if you go to the MTA board meetings from November, I believe it was described in detail there.
So within 6 months, we should have a better idea of how many cars are reduced and how much they're collecting.
Yeah, for instance,
likely be before. Yeah, no, so go on, Alita, sorry.
No, I think the severe cold weather that we've been having has been keeping people off the streets too. So we'll have to really see what the impact is or what it looks like over the next few months. But we did ask, I believe, or comments were made over the years for things like a lockbox and MTA accountabilities, but we don't really know if there is an excess. There are some, I have anyway, financial questions that have not been answered, but we should not spend time on that and go, Kazar, do you have anything else?
Yeah, one other question. The laws were made by who?
It originally was a line item in the governor's budget in 2019, I believe.
So
And
the
it
law-
passed that way,
So the laws were made by human beings, correct?
as opposed to,
Just arbitrary, I don't know, an alien or something. So if the laws are made by human beings, they can be changed by human beings.
correct.
So would it pay to start the ball rolling on the Queensborough or 59th Street bridge, changing some of the entry and exit to reduce, paying $9 for what, 20 feet?
It's come up. I think the board has a resolution asking for tolling in both directions, but other people have expressed exactly what you are, which is the idea of charging people to go from 60th Street or 61st to get on the bridge just seems very unfair. But yes, they can. But however, because even if 60th Street is in the initial law, laws get changed.
Okay, so we've got something to look forward to.
Yeah, I would think that the humans that developed the language in the law intentionally did it in order to have the Queensborough Bridge mostly tolled in both directions.
Yeah,
I cannot imagine that was an oversight.
I guess so. Thanks, both of you.
Thank you. Let's go to Leah. Hi, Leah.
Hey all. I am in Florida right now taking care of my mother. So I haven't gotten to try this myself yet, but my question is about the Brooklyn Bridge. As I have mentioned in the past, the months that I'm not taking care of my mother in Florida, I'm driving back and forth to Suffolk County twice a week to take care of her there. And since I do not work and have not worked since my health crisis several years back, it's a big deal for me to pay $9 or $15 or whatever it turns out to be twice a week to drive my 25-year-old car the 20 feet to get onto the Queensborough Bridge. I had hoped that I could go to the Brooklyn Bridge, although it seems like a deeply stupid way to get to the expressway. But although Craig says that it's free to go down the drive and get on the Brooklyn Bridge, I've been well and truly convinced by WNYC and other news sources that you cannot, in fact, do that, because you will, in fact, have to get off the drive and onto the street grid and under a gantry before you can get back on the Brooklyn Bridge. But as I said, I'm in Florida, so I haven't been able to try it. Could we clarify whether it's really true that you can take the Brooklyn Bridge for free from the drive? Because
I mean, you can get on the bridge. You could get on the bridge from the FDR Drive without
that's the
any.
report, but the news, WNYC says you cannot do that.
Coming
Yeah,
back.
that is not correct. I'm going to share my screen again, and hopefully you'll be able to see this. I'm going to take you onto the MTA website in which they have maps depicting. Are you able to see
Yeah, but
a
you're
map?
too high up. You need to lower it.
Yeah,
to
I
the-
know. I'm gonna scroll down.
Okay.
So this first map is showing the connections as it relates to the FDR Drive and West Streets for inbound traffic. And if you go down to the Brooklyn Bridge, you can see it's showing that if you go inbound on the Brooklyn Bridge and northbound on the FDR Drive, you are not tolled. And then if
But
you're looking
that's inbound, not outbound.
and
It's
here's
outbound. You go
and
right
here's
from the,
outbounds.
yeah,
and
you go
here's
right from
outbounds.
the
And
FDR Drive onto the bridge. It's just a ramp. There's no exit onto city streets going from the
exactly.
FDR Drive to the Brooklyn Bridge. There is to the other bridges, but not the Brooklyn Bridge.
Right.
Okay.
So as I alluded to here, this is outbound. If you are coming south on the bridge, south on the FDR Drive, you can access the outbound Brooklyn Bridge. The blue represents no toll, no congestion fee. Same thing with the Hugh L. Carey Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. But that, of course, is a toll facility, so you would get charged the standard MTA toll rate. And if you're coming inbound, again on the Brooklyn Bridge, if you are heading north on the from Brooklyn onto the FDR Drive, you are not tolled, and assuming that you get to 61st Street or the 63rd Street exit, you will not be tolled.
Right. Well, inbound is not a problem because you can come across the 59th Street Bridge. But what
And that's
document
it.
is this that you've got?
This is from the MTA website. I could put this link in the chat. I will do that right now.
That would be lovely.
And Kevin will share that.
As I said, it does seem like a really stupid way to get from the Upper East Side to Van Dam Street and onto the expressway. But hopefully they'll fix the part about the 59th Street Bridge and that this will.
Well, you need to contact the state representatives if it's something that you would like them to work on, which means letters.
I have spammed Liz Kruger so many times I cannot.
That's what it takes to get people thinking about it. So and if you like it, the same thing. If you want to support it, contact all your state representatives, but that's the way to change it, if possible.
Okay, well, thank you, Craig, for your wonderful presentation, and B, for that diagram, which I will look for in the chat.
You're very welcome.
Okay, Andrew Fine, and then Neil. And if you could identify yourselves with your last names too, please, and whether you live in the district, that would be helpful. I know it's you, Andrew.
Hi, Alita. Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank the co-chairs here for their really, really hard work and their attempt to explain this program to everybody. I know it's very tangled and it's really amazing. They made it so hard to understand that to this day, we're still getting questions. Can you get off here? Can you get on there? Am I getting told? I mean, they could have made this so much simpler. So thank you, Craig. Thank you, Alita. Thank you, Chuck, wherever you are. You guys have done an amazing job and I really appreciate it. And I'm sure the community does as well. I wanted to thank the MTA for being just so generous to the poor. I mean, to think that they only have to pay the full toll 10 times a month, and then they get this amazing break of 50% off is just incredible. I mean, wow. Thanks, MTA. Really looking out for the poor people. They only have to pay $1,700 a year to carry on and do their job. I'd also like to thank the MTA for their transparency. We've now gone into the third week here. We have zero statistics whatsoever, but they're happy to get on TV. They're happy to make a press release and tell us how great this is going without telling us one nickel of what they've collected and what percentage are for hire vehicles that have taken over the roads. What percentage are not paying anything because they have reflective plates or no plates or what have you. But they'll tell you, and Jana will tell you, it's just been amazing. This is the best thing ever. So thanks, MTA. You guys are amazing. I love how you guys are framing things. And so long as we stay completely uninformed, we'll let you inform us. And thank you. It's just fantastic. Aside from that, I'll wait for the next topic, and I know I'm sarcastic and I apologize for that, but this is really just such a disservice to everybody in New York City. It's disservice to the people that are paying the driveway tax just to go home south of 60th Street. And it's a disservice to the businesses like those in Chinatown. They're now suffering a week from Lunar New Year with very, very, very low business. And I'm sure that we're going to see the Port Authority crying when they come out with January numbers. because obviously the Holland and the Lincoln are just not doing the business that they did, and we'll see those reverberations throughout the economy. And I will make this bet right now: we will see a lot greater loss of business and tax revenue than the MTA can ever grift from this incredibly idiotic program. Thank you for your time.
And
We'll
thank you
we'll
for your
have-
question, Andrew.
I don't
Oh,
think
is
there
that a
was a
question?
question. There was no
But
question in
Craig,
there.
really, seriously, thank you for trying to untangle this, and you've done a yeoman's job here.
I do appreciate that. Thank you.
I just want to say, Andrew, that over the course of years that we've been having these meetings, all of your concerns were raised numerous times, and they've gone nowhere. So that's where
And like we've been raising a concern with the 59th Street Bridge this whole time.
correct.
It's not rocket science, but they've made it rocket science, and that's unfortunate.
Well, anyway, we'll have to see what they share as time goes
And
on.
that's the other thing. They have the stats. They're not sharing them, so they're obviously not proud of the job they're doing so far. But they are happy to engage in a PR blitz.
I don't think we can say that. We have asked again. I think we've been pretty thorough in this task force in terms of resolutions and asking for things. We have asked for information, statistics periodically and more frequently than the MTA might be inclined to share the information or provide the information. But again, we don't have the ability to require that they do that. So we'll just have to see what happens. But
exactly. Thank you. And there's a reason they're not sharing it. They are available. And if they were really good, they'd be bragging about it. Instead, they're talking about how few people are coming to patronize New York City south of 60th Street. So thank you.
I think
thank you, Alita.
Yeah, I think we do need to just it's only been 2.5 weeks, so I think it is a little premature in terms of
Absolutely.
reporting.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And the MTA is declaring victory based on whatever statistics they want to share with us.
Well, maybe it's not just their determination, so we'll see. And again, you could ask the state electeds to get involved and have them see if we could get more information. But 2.5 weeks with a spell of extremely cold weather, loss of tourists from the city because they're just not here in January. We'll just have to see what they
exactly.
come up with. Thank you, Andrew.
I agree. Thank you.
Great. Neil?
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just for the 1 point for the last caller with the low income discount, keep in mind they do have to pay and then they get their rebate when they do their taxes. So folks actually don't get the discount at any point until 1 year is up, and then they submit on their taxes to prove their income level. That's when they get the discount for the 11th time they've gone over the bridge. So they're paying in full each month until that happens.
Thank you.
For the caller, 1 point that wasn't raised, I think is a nuance that isn't communicated enough, is that for commercial vehicles, it's per entry, whereas for passenger vehicles, it's per day. So for small box trucks, which are going back and forth a dozen times during the day, they're getting hit with a dozen fees a day. And that's very hard to find on the MTA's website. You have to download a PDF and then you have to read through that PDF to see like a physical, written out evidence of that. For the caller who had the question about the Brooklyn Bridge, I just wanted to share my experience as a community board resident up here. I did, in fact, successfully drive out to Long Island and back without paying a penny to the MTA. That was by taking the FDR, and this is important, north of the congestion zone. Getting on north of the congestion zone, taking the Brooklyn Bridge to Brooklyn. There is actually one place where you can mess up, which is if you stay to the far right, it's going to dump you at City Hall, and their cameras are right there to take your $9. But there are 2 lanes that bear to the left. And so as long as you don't bear right on that Brooklyn Bridge exit, it'll put you on the bridge for free. And in terms of getting to the LIE, you don't have to figure your way up to Van Dam. You take the BQE after a couple of lights to the LIE. It does, however, add 7 miles of New York City driving to your commute. So I guess the MTA wins. They get us out of the zone, but they have us driving an additional 7 miles on New York City highways. And then on the way back, the upper roadway of the 59th Street Bridge, you can actually take either a left or a right as long as you don't go downtown on an avenue. As long as you go uptown on an avenue, you can take that upper roadway. And just from having done it, I want to share that while sitting at the light at Van Dam over by the Cooney School, you'll notice nobody lined up to take the lower roadway. And so in essence, what the city has done is given for hire cars and cabs half of the New York City Bridge to take as their own sort of HOV lane into the city. So the word has spread, but what nobody's talking about is that it's just giving half of our bridge to the for hire cars. And lastly, here's a fun hack that's totally legal and probably impractical for most folks in our community board, but not for everybody. So if you are keeping in mind that you can only be billed once in a 24-hour period, and that resets at midnight, as soon as you hit midnight, if you're somewhere near the zone and you're awake and you're not worried about giving up your parking spot, maybe you have a paid lot, maybe you have a tiny car like a smart car, and so you know if you come back in 5 minutes, you'll still have your spot waiting for you. There's something known as the midnight hack. Once you hit midnight, it's a new day. It's now $2.25 to enter the zone for the entire next day. You can go down towards the 59th Street Bridge, have your plate read for $2.25, turn around, come back to your home. And then if you know you're going to be in the zone at any point later in the day, you won't be charged until we hit midnight for the next day. So if next Thursday, you know you're going to dinner in Midtown and you're up at, let's say, 12:05 early Thursday morning or late Wednesday night, you can do the midnight hack, get billed your $2.25, and you're good for the day. So I just wanted to share that with folks.
Thank you. Much appreciated. On the
My
point
pleasure.
of the Ubers and Lyfts and taxis using the 59th Street Bridge, I just want to make the point that we don't know. It was an issue in London, the rapid expansion of numbers of drivers of those vehicles in the congestion zone in London. And here, the companies Uber and Lyft are not paying anything. It's just and neither are the drivers nor taxi drivers. It's just the passengers, as Craig mentioned, per trip. So you might want to just think about that equation. Anyway, okay, if there's no one else from the public with hands raised, and I don't see any, let's start with Ed and then Robin and then Sebastian.
Oh, wait, we can miss Evelyn, who just raised her hands.
Oh, I didn't
Our
see
most
that.
loyal attendee.
Yes. Oh, there she is. Okay, Evelyn. Hi.
Hey, hi, how are you? Hi. Oh, thank you so much for calling me. Okay, so just one tiny comment. The first day that it went on, there were no cars on Lexington Avenue. I know because in the morning, that's when I walk. I actually am walking to work. Okay, in that particular time, at that particular time. For the first week, I was walking. Very, very, very few cars. Very few cars everywhere. Now, it wasn't 0 degrees out either. So I started thinking, this is a complete boondoggle. This is ridiculous. They have done all this with all the stanchions. They're paying the company. I didn't know they were paying the company to do all the background computer work on these things, but I guess that's who's doing it. So who had the contract with that company? And in any case, that was one question. But the real question is, they're not going to make their $1 billion, not at the rate that they're going. Friends of mine coming into the city over the GW Bridge try to get their parking spots back in garages. The garages are all filled. Everything is filled in the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side, coming from traffic coming in every morning. So, and then people are jumping on the subways. So if they put in, one more time, municipal parking lots, they would have been raking in money. But they didn't do it, and nobody listens to anything, and they had their own plans. Right, we know that. Okay, but anyway, They're not going to make their $1 billion. They're not going to make, I don't see how. I really don't see how. Traffic has really completely changed. The patterns are changed. You're telling us it's because you think it's the very cold weather. That's the recent couple of days, but I don't think so. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Evelyn. That was
No, sorry.
It's just too early to tell. I don't think 2.5 weeks in the middle of the winter, right after implementation, is enough of a time frame. We have different seasons, we have different events, we have different things.
That's true.
I can only imagine UN week and what that might look like, but that's besides the point. I think we need to give it some time to see what's really going on, as well as the impact on people with low incomes that was brought up a couple of times, people with disabilities, small businesses, cultural organizations. So there are a whole host of entities and people that might be affected, and we just need more time to be able to see what's actually going on, as well as whether there are decreases or increases in car emissions in various areas, like those that have been predicted by people in the South Bronx and around Chinatown on the Lower East Side and New Jersey. So we really need to see and what happens with trucks and if they try and avoid the toll and clog up Queens and the Bronx. So we just need we need some more time to examine.
More time. Yeah. Okay. Well, first look is that, are you kidding? That was my first initial. I mean, it's not funny. It's hideous for the people that live in the zone. It's horrible. I have friends that live there. They're just beyond livid. But anyway, and if you think things will ever change, not with their scale of it's going to be more, it's going to be more, it's going to be more, it's going to be more. Their plan is to just keep raising. So I feel sorry. There was all the talk. It was many discussions, and they didn't listen at all. Nothing. They were all about numbers and money. And so anyway, but thank you very much for holding this, and let's see what happens. You're right. Okay.
Thank you. And please come back to all of our other meetings. Thanks, Evelyn.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know Heidi has her hand raised again. Craig, is it okay if we go to her and thank all the board members for their patience?
Well, I was actually gonna say, feel like we should go to the board members, but we do have one more person from the
Devin,
public who hasn't
right?
spoken.
Okay. Good point, Craig.
So let's unmute Devin.
Thanks very much for all this helpful information. So I walk and I bike and I ride the train, and I think it's wonderful if there are no cars. It's good for noise, it's good for street safety, and it's good to increase street amenities such as bike lanes, bike parking, wider sidewalks, more trees. So I'm wondering if we can take a minute to ask what kind of things are planned in the district to reallocate some space for the majority of people who don't drive.
We don't have any plans or are aware of any plans, and that hasn't really been the focus of that. That's more, I think, of the other aspect of Craig, which is in transportation committee.
Exactly what I was going to say. So Devin, I would encourage you to attend CB8's transportation committee meetings first Wednesday of each month, where we often will talk about initiatives, whether they're proposals from New York City DOT or from the MTA or any individual proposals that relate to this, but we're always talking about things that relate to pedestrian safety and issues regarding cycling and bike lanes. This past month, we talked about the Central Park Drive study by the Central Park Conservancy. That was a vigorous discussion. So we are constantly talking about those things. In terms of how it relates to congestion pricing, I think it is very clear from both the law and the MTA's perspective that it was always intended to support the MTA's capital plan, with 80% of the funding essentially going into a lockbox that is dedicated specifically to New York City Transit for capital improvements, with the remaining 20% being divided equally among the Long Island Railroad and Metro North. So that is really the scope of what we talk about here as part of this task force.
Okay, thank you. Ed and Robin and then Sebastian.
Thank you. Thanks, Alita. Thanks, Craig. Thanks for all your hard work and information. Just a few quick points. I mean, I think you know my position overall, just because speaking, I think just for fellow members who are feel the same way, I'll put this up. So my feeling on the piece is that this 59th Street issue is one that is sorely missed by us at Community Board 8 for our local elected officials. It's penalizes people for leaving the island. And for the gentleman who spoke earlier, I believe it was Neil, well done, I might add. Seriously, that is not meant with sarcasm or anything like that. Is truly well done, the information there, because you pointed out some really great points, which is the only way to get off this island without paying is to drive extra, to drive down to the Brooklyn Bridge via 74th Street over on York Avenue, and to get on the drive and go all the way down to the Brooklyn Bridge, go over the Brooklyn Bridge to come back onto the island, where you get told one way or the other. So basically, the MTA has trapped us on the island of Manhattan, and we can only pay to get off, which I say bravo, well done to our elected officials. You take from that what you will. And I don't know what we're doing about it. We were first on it, and what did we do? And what are we doing? I know what some on this call are doing. And I know that there are some legal actions being done and still up in the air. And I know out on Long Island, there's a judge in Hempstead who's waiting to rule as to whether or not they're going to impose any kind of stay on this. And the Trump administration, who knows what they will or will not do, or local federal officials. But as to 59th Street, I think whatever you feel about getting rid of cars, and I can't imagine the car utopia of Manhattan with all of us riding our bikes in this weather to the office downtown. I think that will just be wonderful. Like when we had the subway strike back in 06 and we all had to walk outside, that'll be wonderful. But nevertheless, I'd like to raise that issue. The cost to leave, the issue that Cause raised as to over and above. Cause, they're just going to keep the money. You know that. You were on the community board long enough to know, and it's nice to see you as well. The other part is what I find interesting, especially, is that the way they tried to sell this plan to people down the stretch, because Craig is right and Alita's right. This plan was created to fund the MTA, which is a Leviathan that will continue to eat money and spend money with like a bottomless pit. And for those of you who are like, yippee, all these people who drive cars for joy and fun because we have nothing else to do and our blood pressure isn't high enough, they're coming for you, because once they've taxed the cars and the trucks and there's not enough for the MTA, it's a bottomless pit. They'll come for you with your bikes. They'll come for you with your tennis shoes. They'll come for you with something else, because there are 9 separate funding streams for the MTA already brought up. And by the way, for those of you who do remember or went to policy school and know about the Triborough Bridge, I'm sorry, the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge, Robert Moses began his great career that way. Don't worry, we'll just charge a nickel till we pay for it. I forgot how much we're charging now, and have we paid for it yet? So that's just an existential question I pose. But as to the fact that Neil raised, that we have to drive, I love the environmental part of that. The enviros here. And I say that with an MPA in environmental economics from a long time ago, back when, before the world began, I guess, for the new environmentos, but back in the 90s. So the fact is, we had to drive an extra 7 miles into environmental justice communities and pollute their air downtown to get off this island for free. And I just wonder, as an existential question for the community board at large and for us, what are we doing about it? Do we care about it? Is it even a thing? Or am I just wasting everyone's time in air? That's all. I'll go back to my regular background. I am here, but I'm just listening and doing things. But thanks again, as always, for your patience. And See you guys at full board or when our next in-person meeting is.
There are always the possibility of resolutions if anyone is interested in addressing any of the issues that have been brought up. Robin.
So never follow Ed on a Zoom meeting, I got to tell you. Thank you for your comments, Ed. My question is so vanilla and so anodyne, you're just going to be bored. Craig, your deck made multiple references to West Street, right? Can you talk about West Street versus the West Side Highway?
Basically, West Side Highway isn't actually a street name. West Side Highway, I think, is the vernacular that was used back in the day, and many people still use it, but essentially anything south of where the Henry Hudson Parkway ends at 59th Street is considered West Street, and West Street goes down from 59th Street to the Battery. And that is similar to the FDR Drive south of 60th Street, where if you remain on it, you will not be assessed a toll. But as soon as you enter the street grid, you will be assessed the congestion fee.
Okay, but in terms of the nomenclature, is West Street synonymous with what we call the West Side Highway?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But there's no way to get from the West Side Highway over or through either of the tunnels to New Jersey without having to pay because you're on the streets.
That is correct. And I made that point in the presentation that if you use the FDR Drive West Street combo to access the Holland Tunnel, let's say via Canal Street, you will be tolled on that segment of Canal Street. Or if you cut through, I forget what that little diagonal street is over there. Same thing with the Lincoln Tunnel. There's no direct route or entry from West Street. You have to go via 11th Avenue or 10th Avenue or Dyer Avenue, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Thank you. Sebastian?
Thank you, and especially thank you to Craig for the great presentation there. Question I have is, could you please briefly summarize the Access a Ride program? I know that's not it's not part of congestion pricing, but I wonder if that might be useful information for people to be aware of, especially those who are concerned about getting around with disabilities.
Sure. So Access a Ride is essentially what the mandated ADA service is for anyone who is unable to use public transportation. And you have to apply to be able to use it, but generally, if you are of a certain age or if you have any type of physical impairments and other types of disabilities, you are qualified for it. And it is I believe it's a reservation-based system. So you call to reserve your ride, and you are able to be provided door-to-door service. I believe it is. I believe it is door-to-door, not just curb to curb, because it is an ADA requirement. That being said, the downside of Access a Ride from a transit perspective is that it is a extremely expensive service to operate. There is a lot of demand for it. It is not an on-demand service. So I have a family member that is eligible for it, but the benefit of Access a Ride is that it is, I forget what the rate is, but it is only able to be up to double the amount of the standard of the base fare for public transportation. But the problem is that it is an extremely expensive system to operate, and it is not on demand. So if someone needs a ride in short order, um, and they are able to afford it, it is much easier to use a taxi. And there are phone numbers in which you can request and order a accessible taxi to be able to pick you up and take you to where you need to go. You pay the standard taxi rate, and you're paying the the individual fee, the per trip fee if you were to travel into the congestion zone, but that is another alternative as well. And that's not making any policy statements, that's just providing other mobility options for those who have disabilities. But to say excess ride is not a perfect option, but it certainly is a critical piece of the transit system.
It doesn't
Thank you.
run as smoothly or work as effectively and efficiently as you might think from looking at it or reading about it. So, but Craig's right, it's there as an option. Thanks for your question, Sebastian. Peggy from the public, thanks for your patience, Peggy. You're muted. There should be a prompt on your screen.
Got it. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. This has been a fascinating meeting. Thank you for having it. I've lived in CB8 almost my entire life. And I'm a stereotypical New Yorker who doesn't drive. So I do all public transport. Before I get to my comments, I'm going to just have one question. Does anybody know if there are plans by the MTA to increase the number of buses and subways? It started last summer, even before congestion pricing, as more New Yorkers are being urged to go back to the office. And now there's a movement to get everybody back to the office 5 days a week. I'd be waiting 20 minutes for a bus in Manhattan. And I check and it'd say, we have a shortage of bus drivers. Is London, when they instituted congestion pricing, from what I'd heard from my friends, they increased the number of tubes and buses they had. I'm not seeing the MTA making that effort. Is that because they're trying to fudge their numbers and keep their costs in check by not having more buses and subways? I have a lot of friends who will not go out after 9 p.m. anymore because they don't want to wait for 20 minutes for a bus to take them home in what can be a desolate area. And they don't want to, or they can't pay for a taxi or an Uber to take them home. So have any of you had a chance to find out if there are any plans to increase as they're trying to get people into?
I do know that London did add a lot of buses, maybe 80 buses or so, along with parking lots for cars. I do know that I've stood and waited for buses on the west side to come over to the east side, even at 10 or 10:30, and there's been 20-minute wait. So I understand that. But in terms of, and I know the community board has looked at changes in potential bus routes, but that was a while ago on East 66th Street, for instance, going to the west side. But I don't know about plans to increase the number or types of buses. Maybe you do, or trains, maybe you do, Craig.
Yeah, my understanding is so far they have not, there have been some announcements made about certain bus routes. I'm not sure if they've made any similar recommendations in regards to subways. I think that is something that we've spoken about in the past, certainly about the importance of them providing that additional service. I think the other piece of that equation is that we are obviously in a post-pandemic period where there is not necessarily a decrease in the amount of service that was provided before the pandemic, but we are still not at the same ridership level. So MTA will do frequent service adjustments based off of essentially ridership demands. And they may have, in fact, determined that there was nothing at this point that spoke to potential overcrowding as a result of congestion pricing. And overcrowding is not necessarily what the public perceives as overcrowding, but there are actual metrics that are used in terms of service delivery to ensure that you are that the MTA is operating within what is considered acceptable levels. From a policy standpoint, I think there is probably a lot of agreement that the MTA as part of congestion pricing should be increasing the amount of service, especially during off-peak overnight hours. But I don't believe that they have done so, and in my opinion, that's problematic.
It's
thank
it's not
you.
it's not just the subway either. I went to a presentation involving Times Square Alliance and Council Member Eric Botcher about bringing people back to Broadway, and there was concern for people playing music, for instance, or set dressers at the theater not wanting to go home at midnight or 2 in the morning on the subways the way that they are. So certainly it's an issue in terms of the numbers, in terms of safety, at the same time that people are being urged or maybe even pushed, according to some, to get back on the train. It's a bad reference, I guess, for the trains, that there be more, but I don't know. It's not one of the things I think that they've talked about. So we'll see.
They have announced that there are going to be certain routes in which they are going to be increasing bus service starting potentially in the spring or summer. I don't know if there are any that operate within our community district. I just lost where I had pulled that up, but that is something that we probably want to keep focusing on as we're looking to see the um, transit system work better for everyone.
Thank you. I think that should be a focus for the Transportation Committee. I mean, it's about 6 years now when I read the slowest bus in New York City was the M79. My sons went to school on the West Side. If I had to go to their school, I would walk through the park because I get there faster than taking the bus. And it just seems that various bus routes in CB8 seem to have gotten even worse, but the crowding during peak times is really, really bad. And now you permit strollers on the bus and everything else, and it's a horror show. And I just think congestion pricing, and unless the MTA increases the number of buses and subways, it's going to get worse. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Emily?
And after Emily, I think we should move on to the next agenda item.
Agreed.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'd take a call, but I wasn't sure if this was covered. But on the question of ridership and accounting for ridership, so does the MTA count ridership on the basis of fares collected? Because I know that they've had a lot of problems and a lot of criticism due to the rampant fare evasion that has remained largely unchecked. And so if they're relying on fare collection to count the ridership numbers, I suspect that they are vastly undercounting.
No, I don't believe that is the case. As you may know, there have, and I think everyone is aware, there's clearly been issues with fare evasion and non-fare payment, and it has been a much more severe issue on the buses rather as opposed to the subways. I believe fare evasion rates on at subways were about 12-13%. Don't quote me on that. While on buses they were approaching 50%. I don't remember if that was system-wide or on certain routes, but it is definitely an epidemic at this point. That being said, there are mechanisms, especially on the buses, I'm aware of, where I believe that New York City Transit's vehicles are equipped with automatic passenger counters, and basically every time that someone enters and exits a bus, there is essentially a beacon that is able to detect that activity, and it does its account based on the actual number of passengers. And I work in public transportation, not in New York City, but I can vouch personally for the fact that such counters are very accurate, that they are generally within like the deviation from manual counts tends to be like less than 2% if the system is configured and operating properly. So those are the numbers that I would suspect that New York City Transit is reporting. They would not, if knowing what I know, I would have to believe that they would want to report the higher numbers because there are all sorts of funding allocations that are based off of a number of factors, including ridership, and they would not want to artificially deflate their ridership reporting as a result of non-fare payment, fare evasion.
I just want to also mention that one of the points raised in this task force over the years has been that if the MTA were actually able to collect subway and bus fares, that the need for the congestion pricing toll would have been maybe moot or certainly minimized. So that's come up here, but for the rest of it, in terms of urging anything else, Transportation Committee would be the place to be. So at this point, we should move to item 2, which has to do with the redundant taxi fare, which I guess I call it. I don't know what you call it, Craig, but the idea that we have a 250 fare that's been in place has raised hundreds of millions of dollars for the MTA for quite some time, that we thought might disappear when the congestion pricing actual toll came into effect, but which hasn't. And so the question is raised what to do about that. And possibly a suggestion was also made that it should be reduced in proportion to the proposed toll that had been reduced 40% from $15 to $9. But Craig?
Yeah, I also just put together some information on that, so I'm going to share my screen again. Just want to bring everyone up to speed and make sure that everyone has the background regarding this and is coming from a place of common understanding. So this, can everyone see the slide? Alita, can you see the slide?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
great. So this surcharge, to be clear, is entirely separate from congestion pricing as we've been discussing. Congestion pricing was enacted into law through the 2020 adopted New York State budget. The congestion surcharge for taxi and for hire vehicles was adopted through the 2019 budget. So it was passed in April of 2018. So in that adopted budget, there were various accounts that were established. There was what is known as the New York City Transportation Assistance Fund, and the language made clear that it shall be kept separate from and shall not be commingled with any other monies of the MTA. And that comprises of 3 different pieces. There's a subway action plan account, the outer borough transportation account, and the general transportation account. So the law states that a congestion pricing surcharge is imposed on interstate transportation provided in for hire or I messed that up. For hire vehicles in trips that begin, end, or pass through the congestion zone. And in this case, the congestion zone was defined as south of and excluding 96th Street. So the mandated rates for those are $2.50 for each taxi trip that operates in this congestion zone, $2.75 for any for hire vehicle trip. Again, apologies, I was rushing to put this together right before the meeting, but $2.75 for any for hire vehicle trip, meaning Uber, Lyft, livery taxis, and 75 cents for pool trips. Now, there's a definition for pool trips. I'm not sure if that still exists. This may have been back when Via was operating, and their business model had it so that people would be picked up along the way, and each trip would be considered a pool trip where you'd have multiple people getting in at multiple points. I believe there may be certain types of Uber and Lyft trips that may qualify for that, but I believe the vast majority of people who use Uber and Lyft are using it using the standard UberX, or I forget what the Lyft version is, where it's going to fall into that $2.75 range. So the law further states, and this is in New York State Tax Law, Section 1299H, that starting in 2019, there were defined amounts all around the $300 million range, and subsequent to 2020, for all the congestion surcharges that are the taxing for vehicles, for hire vehicle surcharges that are collected. The first 300 million in revenues deposited into the subway action plan account that I alluded to earlier. And then once that is exhausted, the next 50 million goes into the outer borough transportation accounts. And any remaining funds, which include uncommitted funds from that outer borough accounts, because there are certain funds within that need certain board approvals in order to get allocated, then they are transferred to the general transportation account. And I've pulled here a portion of the MTA adopted 2025 to 2028 budgets. And you can see here at the bottom, this portion here shows what was collected in 2023 and what was budgeted for 2024 and is budgeted for upcoming years. So in 2023, you could see that there was $300 million that went into it. If you recall, the next 50 million was to go into the outer borough transportation accounts. Only $22.2 million was available for that. So you can see the projections going forward that is expected to remain relatively constant. And then a relatively small portion is expected to go into the general transportation account. And that's really just the background as relates to this. And again, just to be clear, we are for a passenger in a taxi or for hire vehicle, it may seem as if they are all one and the same, because at the end of the day, you're only really concerned with how much your trip is costing, but this is a separate law and separate fee. So just want to make sure that was understood.
It may be, but I think there's been some concern that it's still a lot of money going to the MTA that really affects the livelihood or the existence of taxis. People may not be riding them as frequently as soon as you close the door, and there are more fees on top of that. With the $2.50 and the 75 cents, it's over $3 just to go towards the MTA, and maybe that is a burden on people because of especially coming from airports, where as soon as you cross 96th Street, it clicks up $2.50, and that just makes it rougher for people when there is no real way of getting back from the airports by subway or by bus that's efficient.
And then I just want to make sure that, just to go back to the real basis of this discussion. So this board back in 2019, and the resolution is posted on our website and on the agenda for this meeting. In December 2019, we did pass a resolution in which we called for the New York State Assembly, Senate, and Governor to implement laws that eliminate the $2.50 fee assessed on yellow taxis in Manhattan south of 96th Street. And we specifically separated out the yellow taxis from the other for-hire vehicles because of the concern regarding how the taxi industry has been decimated over recent years with the inflation of the medallion values and the reduction of the number of medallions that are out there, and the competition from private providers such as Uber and Lyft that was hurting the city sanctions TLC vehicles. So again, want to make that distinction that our resolution that is in effect was only in regards to taxis, not for other for-hire vehicles. Right.
Well, that's another discussion about the value and the importance of taxis, but in any event, that's where it stands. And the idea that the MTA has gotten looks like quite a bit of money. And so naturally people will just assume congestion pricing and MTA and this fee, even if they do go to one of many, many buckets apparently that the MTA has. But let's just go to, unless you want to comment, Craig, we should go to Heidi and see.
Yeah, and just one more piece of information that I just want to share just for context purposes, and that is, I know I mentioned the subway action plan, and that's where the bulk of this funding is going for, and just want to highlight what that plan actually was. So I'm reading from an MTA document. The subway action plan was launched at the direction of Governor Cuomo in July 7th, 2017 to take extraordinary measures to stabilize and improve the service on the more than 100-year-old subway system. So if everyone recalls, we went through what was known as the Summer of Hell with a lot of breakdowns, resulting in poor service um, on the New York City transit system, especially in subways. And in order to rectify that, this is when Andy Byford was the head of New York City Transit. They developed this subway action plan, which was a precursor, or I forget if it was part of Fast Forward, but basically looking to try to address the crisis and to try to bring this subway system into a state of good repair. So that's
So
what this is funding.
is any of it, could any of it be considered capital projects? Because that's the money the congestion pricing fee is supposed to go towards. Is that right?
Yes, I don't know offhand which projects were part of that versus I didn't do that research. Um
We
and
don't
and
know if
and
it,
and, and yeah, but I think these were more I don't want to speculate because I don't know the answer. I don't want to misspeak and give inaccurate information. So
thank you.
better off not
Just
saying.
so that at this point, we don't know if it's redundant of the places that the congestion pricing fee funds are going to. Well, in any event, Heidi?
Hi. Thank you again for having me. I just want to say I've lived in New York more than 40 years, and I spent most of my life walking 6, 7 miles a day in the city. And I spent the past 2 years on crutches. I'm off the crutches now, so no worries. But first of all, I want to give a big shout out to the New York City yellow taxis because they were among the kindest people with me on the crutches and opening doors for me, getting out, asking me if I'm okay. So I think we all have to be really grateful. I would have never guessed in all my years living in Manhattan how fabulous the New York City cab drivers were. And I will say, even more than the Uber drivers, they were far kinder. And we would get in discussions, and they are hurting. They are hurting very badly. And my background is as a financial analyst, and I'm curious to know what kind of accountability does the MTA have? Do they have meetings? Do they have, and please, if you know where this is, please guide me. Do they produce their financial results? Are they accountable for producing their balance sheets, their income statements? I mean, do we get financial accountability from them? And are there regular meetings to attend?
So I'm going to post in the chat, and I will have Kevin post it publicly, a link to the MTA transparency page, which includes all the links to their monthly board meetings and where you can access all of their documents, all of their financial documents, and all of the board books, and basically all the information that they're making public is part of this transparency tab. And that I'm not making any claims as to whether they are being fully transparent or whether there are any concerns about how they spend their money. Different people probably certainly have different opinions about that, but I just want to provide that information so you have a sense of where it is. But they do have monthly meetings. They are open to the public. They are broadcast live on YouTube and on the MTA website. And you can even attend in person if you had an interest in doing that. And they are usually at the very end of the month, the last Monday and Wednesday of the month. Not every month do they conform to that schedule, but generally they do. Monday is when they have all the committee meetings. It's basically all day, and Wednesday they have the full board meeting itself where they take the actual votes. So I will get that in the chat in the moment.
Thank
I
you.
hope that is helpful.
Yes,
There are
thank-
also reporting requirements for information about congestion pricing. I know that this task force asked for frequent and soon reporting about we had a number of statistics that we were looking for. But I think the MTA, their first statistics are not for a while, sometime this year, I think, but maybe not at least for 6 or 9 months. I don't have that information right handy, Craig.
Yeah, I forgot to refresh my memory. I'll see if I could pull up the answer shortly.
And there were
Um,
metrics as well. I think that we're looking for like the passenger level, or that the MTA is supposed to provide passenger levels and funding and changes in traffic in the zone, but I'm not exactly sure. We were also interested in information relating to increased pollution levels, air quality levels, traffic, and specific information for this district because of concerns about people leaving their cars or searching for parking, or clogging the streets here to be able to get on the FDR Drive and not have to pay, those kinds of things. But I'm not sure. And then there's also, I know you know about this, Craig, there's a state agency that's responsible for kind of overseeing the MTA. Whether they're effective at that or not is a question that some people have raised, but there's something out there. I'm the name of it is escaping me right
yeah,
now.
it's the MTA Inspector General. There's actually a New York State office of the MTA Inspector General.
But
And
I
they
find,
are
yeah.
Yeah, they provide on their website now, were created in 1983 to provide independent oversight of the MTA with broad authority over its activities, programs, employees, and contractors. And then just in terms of MTA meetings, the next set of meetings are actually next week on Monday, the 27th, and Wednesday, the 29th, in case anyone is interested in those, where I'm sure congestion pricing will be a topic.
I just want to say, it's interesting how the MTA has been very successful when I discuss the congestion pricing with friends or people I know. They've done a great job of creating a narrative that this is about air quality. And it doesn't seem, I'd be interested to know what the evidence is that this is about air quality or having an impact on air quality. It seems really like a drive just to fund the MTA. Do you believe that my perception of this is accurate, or is there something with air quality involved, and has there been data presented to support congestion pricing vis-a-vis air quality?
On their website, originally they said that funding for the MTA was the primary goal, but that consequences, or I guess intended, what they hope would happen would be a reduction in congestion and a concurrent reduction in emissions. But I don't know if they've measured the air quality at certain points to be able to use as a comparator. I just don't know whether they've done that. There also have been comments made by the governor and investigations by the New York Times that buildings contribute far more environmental emissions than cars do. But for instance, I just read an article today in the New Republic that cited the environmental benefits already. So I have no idea where they got that information from, but it will be interesting to see how they determine whether or not it's effective. But again, I mentioned this earlier, in the South Bronx, the Congress member Richie Torres was very concerned about the impact of trucks using the Cross Bronx to avoid tolls in Manhattan, the impact on that environmental justice community. And the MTA is providing, I think, over $100 million in what they hope are mitigation of potential environmental impacts. The Lower East Side, Chinatown area has raised the same questions. I don't know that they're getting help from the MTA to deal with that, or even measurements. And New Jersey as well has raised that. And I think that's one of the things that they've said about the environmental assessment. And the New Jersey governor made a personal plea to the new president about getting rid of congestion pricing. And I think all or a large part of their argument was about an inadequate environmental assessment by the federal highway people, and in determining whether cars will indeed be backed up at the George Washington Bridge to avoid having to pay the fees. So I think it's a wait and see, and a determination of what kinds of statistics they're using, where they're coming from, how they determine a before and after.
Yeah, I just found language. This is a synopsis that's discusses how the budget bill mandated that the MTA, with the assistance of New York City DOT, issue public performance reports a year after the tolling system goes into effect and every 2 years thereafter. Financial reports on spending are due every year, and reports will address congestion changes for for-hire vehicles and transit, vehicle miles traveled for for-hire vehicles, traffic volumes for all vehicle types, environmental and air quality improvements, congestion reduction measures, changes in transit ridership and bus speeds within the central business district, and all receipts and expenditures for the entire program. So I think that is the minimum that they would be reporting, and I need to see if there was any other additional information on that, and I would not be surprised if there is more detailed reporting beyond that.
We asked
And
for
we,
more.
of course, asked for it.
Right, we asked for it, but if they respond the way they haven't indicated whether they will comply with our request or not, but we did ask for more frequent and again more local statistics, or statistics that apply specifically to us as well as to the overall zone and the rest of the city as they're measuring it.
Thank you.
Michelle? Thanks for your patience.
Thank you both for all the information in this meeting and for holding it. Heidi asked a question that I've been asking for a really, really long time. I haven't gotten, to me, a satisfactory answer. Maybe there's a legal person on this call that would know the answer. But because this is what I was told, and I'm actually mentioning this because I need clarification. The MTA is an authority, and so it does its own internal audits. And I asked the question of a legal person as to who does the external audit. I mean, here you have a big organization that does just internal audits. That to me did not seem satisfactory. The answer I got, I don't know if it's the correct answer, is that it was set up probably as an authority, because in government, to be an authority means that you really have no external oversight. I don't know whether or not that's true. And for me, the question remains open, as it does for Heidi. I don't know who has oversight over this organization and whether or not it is true that in government, if the word authority appears, that has a certain definition that talks about internal audits, no external oversight. So that would be interesting to know. I don't know really how to do the research on that. I've asked attorneys that I know, and one attorney said to me that can't be possible, that there's no external oversight. And the other attorney said to me the fact that it's called an authority means that they do internal audits. So I have no idea. If anybody could shed some light on that, I think we all would really like to know. In terms of the environmental impact, it was really funny. Alita explained very well about what Richie Torres did in the Bronx, but it was sort of a ludicrous solution. In other words, it was an acknowledgement from the MTA that there was going to be increased emissions in that area, and therefore they were offering mitigation. And their mitigation was all this money and the offer for that money or whatever to build an asthma center. Well, if you had children getting asthma from increased emissions, it's hardly satisfactory to say that you will mitigate in 5 to 10 years, if that soon, to cure these children and others of the lung diseases or asthma or whatever they might get as a result. So it was sort of, to me, it was silly mitigation. I don't know who it placated. It was after the fact. The Lower East Side was supposed to have air quality monitors installed. And we check on this fairly frequently. To my knowledge, there have been no such monitors installed to date. And that is also an environmental justice community. Although that always bothers me because everybody is entitled to clean air. I don't think you have to be categorized particularly, but the fact is they have been categorized, and yet there's been no, not even to mention mitigation, but there has been no monitoring yet. And yet there is acknowledgement that because they are, much of that community is right on the drive and gets an accumulation of the traffic, that they in fact will be very severely impacted, and they have minimal ability, not to mention those who can't use mass transit, but they don't even have mass transit down there. There is no subway station, that's way east near the drive or in that area of the Lower East Side. The point, that sort of comes around the FDR Drive at the lowest point before it circles around to become, the West Side Drive. So those are all concerns, but I share your interest, Heidi. If anybody has the answer to those questions, I'd love to hear it. Thank you.
I will just say I can't answer most of those questions, especially from a legal perspective. Deloitte is an external auditor for the MTA and does review the MTA's financial statements.
Who does? I
Beyond
didn't hear.
Deloitte.
Oh, Deloitte. Okay. Do we ever get it? Can we get their report, their most recent report?
I don't know, and I'm having problems finding anything beyond just
That. If they're public auditors, doesn't it have to be public?
It should be, I would imagine so.
I don't know anybody who's ever been able to find it. I'm not claiming it's not there. I'm just saying it's pretty obtuse.
I've only found the one page communique that basically says that that nothing came to their attention to believe that the MTA failed to comply with the authority's investment guidelines, the New York State Controller's investment guidelines, section 2925 of the Public Authorities Law, and another section of the Public Authorities Law. But yeah.
Well,
but basically it was just of the financial statements from what I could see.
The Daily News has done some groundbreaking work in terms of MTA use of funds. A couple of summers ago, they reported on the expansion of the railroad into Grand Central Station, and more recently than that, on the contractor situation with the Second Avenue subway. But that's the Daily News, and I don't know.
Is it true that the word authority has a meaning in that way in government, as someone had described it to me? Is that true? Does anybody know?
I don't know. I'm not a government lawyer. It sounds pretty technical, but I don't know.
Yeah,
The
I can't.
authority would be the same thing, wouldn't it? Because they're also an authority.
Yeah, and I guess the other distinction, just in terms of oversight, is that because it is a public entity as an authority, that they do have a board that is intended to provide that independent oversight.
If
And
it's
they
their
are
board.
accountable to the public and the political realities of anything that they do, and that elected officials are also going to be held accountable if a state entity is not operating well, or
Well, there are also supposed to be certain protections built in, or that we've asked for, with respect to ensuring that the money goes to the MTA, that it's used in certain avenues, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Maybe this is helpful. I just looked up and found from the New York State Control's Office, what is a public authority? So if you want, I could just read it. It's 3 paragraphs. Public authorities are corporate instruments of the state created by the legislator to further public interest. Public authorities have various levels of autonomy from the state based on the powers as well as the constraints built into their legislative mandate. Some public authorities are completely self-supporting and operate entirely outside the budget process, while others rely on state appropriations to fund operations. In addition, most authorities are authorized to issue bonds without voter approval to develop and maintain infrastructure or to fund projects for third parties. The debt service for these bonds is usually supported by revenues of the project, such as tolls levied by the authority, fees paid by the third party, or appropriated payments from the state to repay outstanding debt. The state also assigned specific revenue streams to an authority as a way for the authority to pay debt service. And then here, this may be of interest. Unlike traditional state agencies, many authorities conduct business outside of the typical oversight and accountability requirements for operations, including, but not limited to, employment practices, contracts and procurement procedures, and financial reporting. Each public authority is governed by a separate board of directors appointed by elected officials for varying terms of office. The Public Authorities Reform Act of 2009, that shows how outdated this is, will require many new measures designed to improve the oversight and accountability of New York's public authorities. So I'm not sure if that's too old, but hopefully that last paragraph provided some.
And the word autonomy, that would be interesting if that were defined in terms of the MTA. But
it
I don't
doesn't
think
even. It doesn't classify all public authorities in the same way. I think
No,
Craig
it didn't.
word many public authorities, and
Right.
so we have no idea
But
what
it used the word autonomy, which was
Right.
interesting.
But it doesn't say all public authorities have autonomy or all public
Correct.
authorities aren't subject to state oversight. So we just don't know what applies.
But can we just ask for their current, since it alluded to the fact that it should be open to the public that there is an outside audit. I guess we can request it. I'm not suggesting FOIAing it because we'll get it in 2 years, but if we can get it or be pointed in that direction, that might be helpful, just because a lot of us are asking.
Yeah, we could ask if the board office could ask.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Devin?
Hi, thanks for giving me the floor again. To Michelle's question, Craig mentioned the MTA OIG, the Office of the Inspector General, and that is actually an external auditor. They are not under the MTA. It's a separate state office that in theory has power over the MTA to make recommendations. And that goes from, I went to their office and I talked to some of them at one point. So some of the attorneys there, and they're also, financial auditors. They do financial audits. They inspect individual bus drivers' overtime fraud, for example. They recommend, reforms to LIRR overtime practice, things like that. And that's on their website. So that may be a place to go for some of those questions. Maybe more accessible than Deloitte.
Thank you. That's very helpful information. Thank you. Anyone else? Any other comments or questions relating to the taxi surcharges? Craig?
I don't have anything else.
Me either. Michelle? Or Sebastian?
I move to adjourn.
Likewise, I second.
Same point. Okay. Well, then I
Great.
guess the meeting is
Thank
adjourned.
you.
Thank you
take
so
that.
much, everyone, for attending. And thank you, Craig, for all that detailed presentation. I know you're really good at that stuff. So thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Good night.
Our next meeting is in April, so please stay tuned and join us again. Maybe we'll have more information, or there will be more reporting by the media on this, or comments by the MTA. So thank you. See you
Yeah,
then.
and by then, hopefully we'll have a better sense of how it's going. And the dust will have settled, hopefully. But thank you, everyone. Have a good
Thank you.
night.
Thanks
Good night.
all. Bye.